The laughter came before the pain could prepare him for it. Sharp laughter. The kind that slices instead of fades. It cracked through the plaza like glass breaking under pressure. Sudden and cruel, turning heads and drawing eyes toward a moment that would not let itself be ignored. For one breathless second, the world seemed normal. Then the sound landed fully, and everything shifted. The plaza was alive in that careless everyday way. Phones buzzed in pockets. Heels clicked against stone. A street musician played something soft that no one really listened to. People moved fast, chasing meetings, money, importance. And in the middle of all that motion, the laughter found its target. It started small. One man smirked, then laughed out loud. Another joined him, louder this time. A woman covered her mouth, pretending to hide her smile, but failing. The sound spread, feeding on itself, until it wrapped around one man standing still while the rest of the world flowed around him. He was a black man in an old jacket that had seen too many winters. The seams were tired, the elbows were worn thin, his shoes were clean but scuffed, the kind of scuffs that come from miles walked, not neglect. He held a worn leather folder tight against his chest, fingers curled around it as if letting go might cause something inside him to spill out. It wasn't protection, but it was close. It was habit, it was survival. He didn't move, he didn't flinch, but his stillness made him visible in a way motion never does. Suits passed by him, slowing just enough to take him in. Their eyes lingered longer than politeness allowed. Some frowned, some smiled, some looked at him the way people look at something out of place, like a stain on a clean shirt. A group of young professionals gathered a few steps away, whispering at first, then laughing louder once they felt safe in numbers. One man tilted his shoulders, copying the way the black man stood, exaggerating it into a joke. Another lifted his phone, angling the camera just right, already imagining the comments. "Bro thinks he's important," someone said, loud enough to be heard. The words hit him, but he didn't show it. His jaw tightened just a fraction. His eyes stayed forward. Years ago, he had learned what reacting too fast could cost you. He had learned how silence could be armor. So he stood there, breathing slow, letting the laughter wash over him like rain he'd already survived 1,000 times before. Inside him, something old stirred, something trained. Discipline that had been drilled into him long before this plaza existed. Control that had been earned the hard way. Memories pressed against the back of his mind, uninvited but steady. Long nights, early mornings, orders given and orders followed. Loss carried quietly. Across the open space, a wealthy businessman noticed the scene. He was hard to miss. Tailored suit that fit like it was made just for him. Shoes polished to a shine, a watch that caught the light every time he moved his wrist. He stood with a small group, coffee in hand, laughter easy on his lips. He watched the black man for a moment, then smirked like he'd just confirmed something he already believed. He leaned closer to his friends, voice low but confident. "This is what happens when people forget their place." The words didn't shout. They didn't need to. They carried weight because of who said them and who agreed by nodding along. They landed harder than the laughter because they were calm, certain. As if the world really did come with assigned roles and this man had stepped outside his. The black man heard it. He felt it. The old instinct rose again, sharp and hot, but he kept it in check. He had learned that dignity sometimes means enduring what should never be acceptable. Not because it's right, but because reacting wrong can cost you everything. Security stood nearby, close enough to see what was happening, far enough to pretend they didn't. One guard leaned against a pillar, arms crossed, a half smile on his face. Another glanced over, then looked away, choosing comfort over courage. No one stepped in, no one said stop. Silence filled the gaps between the laughs, and that silence became permission. The crowd grew bolder. Someone clapped sarcastically. Someone else shook their head like the black man was a bad joke. The phone camera stayed up, recording every second, waiting for a reaction that could be edited and shared without context. The black man shifted his weight slightly, not in fear, in readiness. His fingers loosened on the folder. He lowered it just enough to feel the air against his chest. His breathing slowed even more. In his mind, he counted the way he had been taught. In, hold, out. Control before chaos. He took one step forward. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't fast, but it was deliberate. The laughter faltered, not because people understood why, but because something about the movement felt different. His posture changed. His shoulders squared. His spine straightened. The man who had looked out of place a moment ago suddenly looked grounded, like he belonged exactly where he stood. His voice didn't shake when he spoke. It didn't rise above the noise. It cut through it. Enough. One word. Calm, measured. A command, not a request. Every laugh died mid-breath. A man's mouth stayed open, sound trapped inside. A woman's hand froze halfway to her face. The phone lowered without the person holding it realizing why. The musician across the plaza stopped playing, the final note hanging in the air before dropping into silence. The plaza went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the ground itself had been told to listen. People looked around, confused by their own stillness, unsure why they had stopped, only knowing that something had changed. The businessman's smirk faded just a little, not fear, surprise. He straightened, eyes narrowing, trying to understand why a single word from a man he had already dismissed had reached him at all. The guards uncrossed their arms. One shifted his stance without meaning to. Muscle memory waking up, old instincts stirring, even if they didn't yet understand why. The black man stood there, hands relaxed at his sides now, the folder hanging loose. His face was calm, but his eyes carried weight. Not anger, not shame. Something deeper, something earned. No one laughed again. No one spoke. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, forcing everyone present to sit with what they had just done and what they were about to witness. And in that silence, before anyone could find their voice again, before the crowd could decide whether to push back or step away, it became clear that this moment was no longer about mockery. It was about power, and no one yet knew who truly held it. For a moment, no one moved. Not because they were told to stop, but because something in the air had shifted, and they didn't yet have words for it. The single command still echoed in their ears, heavy and strange, carrying a weight that didn't match the man they thought they were looking at. People glanced at each other, confused, embarrassed, unsettled by their own silence. A second ago, laughter felt easy, natural. Now it felt exposed, wrong. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else shuffled their feet. A nervous chuckle tried to rise and died halfway out. The businessman hated that feeling most of all, the loss of control, the pause where attention turned inward instead of toward him. His jaw tightened as he stepped forward, polishing confidence into his voice like armor. "Who do you think you are?" he called out, loud enough to remind everyone that he was used to being heard. "You don't give orders here." A few heads nodded. The crowd needed an anchor, and power always volunteered itself. Security finally moved, boots scraping stone as they closed the distance. Not to protect the man who had been mocked, never that. They moved with the clear goal of restoring what they thought was order. One guard smirked as he approached, the kind of smile that says this won't take long. "Sir," he said, drawing out the word, "you're causing a disturbance." The black man turned his head slowly, meeting the guard's eyes without flinching. His face stayed calm, almost gentle, but his gaze was steady in a way that made people uncomfortable. "I'm not," he said. His voice was low, controlled. "But you are." That sentence landed harder than the command before it, because it wasn't loud, because it wasn't angry, it didn't beg or threaten. It simply stated a truth no one had expected to hear spoken out loud. The guard laughed once, short and sharp, as if the idea itself was a joke. Phones came back out. The moment was back on track, at least that's what the crowd thought. Whispers spread fast now, quick and excited. People leaned in. They wanted a show. They wanted resolution, and they wanted it to look familiar. They had already written the ending in their heads. The businessman stepped closer, invading space with practiced ease. His chest puffed out. His voice rose just enough to carry. "People like you always think respect is owed," he said, shaking his head like a disappointed teacher. "It's earned." The words cut deep because they were old words. Words the black man had heard in different mouths, in different places, wearing different uniforms. Words that had been used to justify closed doors and lowered expectations. They echoed with history, and that history pressed heavy on his chest for a brief moment. Then he straightened. It was subtle, a shift most people wouldn't notice if they weren't already watching so closely. His shoulders rolled back, his spine aligned, his stance widened just a little, grounding him. This wasn't defiance, it wasn't aggression, it was something else. Something learned in places where mistakes cost more than pride. "I've earned mine," he said quietly. No anger, no apology, just certainty. The words seemed too small for the space they filled, but they stopped the air all the same. The guard scoffed. Someone in the crowd laughed again, louder this time, trying to restart the rhythm of mockery. "Prove it!" a voice shouted. That was the moment everything crossed a line. Because the man didn't flinch, he didn't shrink. He didn't look around for help or approval. He didn't look humiliated anymore. He looked ready, prepared, like someone who had been waiting patiently for permission to speak a truth that made others uncomfortable. The businessman felt it first, even if he couldn't explain it. A tightening in his chest. A sudden awareness of eyes not just watching the black man but watching him too. Measuring, comparing. Security hesitated now, just a fraction of a second too long. Training tugged at something buried deep, clashing with bias and habit. The guard closest to the man shifted his weight, unsure why his pulse had picked up. The black man reached up and adjusted the strap of the worn leather folder, letting it hang at his side. The motion was slow, intentional. It drew every eye in the plaza. Silence crept back in, heavier this time, edged with expectation. People stopped whispering. The phones kept recording, but the hands holding them weren't as steady anymore. No one laughed. No one interrupted. The crowd sensed it, even if they didn't understand it yet. This was no longer entertainment. This was exposure. The businessman opened his mouth to speak again, to reclaim the moment, but something held him back. Pride warred with unease. He didn't like the way the black man stood now. Didn't like the way the air seemed to lean toward him. "You don't belong here," the businessman said finally, softer than before, but still sharp. "This isn't your world." The black man met his gaze, and for the first time something flickered behind his calm. Not rage. Memory. "I've stood in places where belonging meant survival," he said, "and I learned something there." The guard laughed again, louder, too loud. This guy thinks he's special. But even as the words left his mouth, doubt crept in. Because something about the man's presence didn't match the story they were trying to tell about him. He didn't plead. He didn't explain. He didn't posture for sympathy. He waited, and waiting, in a moment like this, takes power. The businessman felt sweat at the back of his neck. He glanced around, expecting agreement, but found hesitation instead. The crowd was no longer fully on his side. Curiosity had crept in, unease. People started to wonder what they didn't know. Security exchanged a look. One guard cleared his throat. "Sir," he said again, but this time the word carried less confidence. "We're going to need you to move along." The black man didn't move. He didn't need to. "You asked me to prove it," he said, his voice still calm, still measured. "Be careful what you ask for." The words hung there, unresolved, like a door left slightly open in a quiet house. The crowd leaned forward without realizing it. The businessman felt his certainty slipping, replaced by something he hated even more than disrespect. Uncertainty. Because in that moment, standing in the middle of a plaza that had turned against its own cruelty, one truth became impossible to ignore. This man wasn't afraid. And whatever came next was going to change everything. The moment stretched thin, tight enough to snap. The plaza held its breath as the black man slipped his hand inside his jacket. Not fast, not panicked. There was no fear in the motion. Only intention. The kind that comes from knowing exactly what you are about to reveal and understanding the cost of revealing it. The guard stiffened at once, shoulders squared, hands hovered near their belts. Training rose before thought could stop it. The crowd gasped softly, a sound like air escaping a sealed room. A few people took half a step back without realizing why. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, hearts thudding, sensing that this moment was no longer safe or familiar. He drew his hand out slowly. What rested in his palm was small. No shine, no decoration meant to impress civilians. It wasn't gold or oversized or dramatic. But it didn't need to be. The shape alone told its story. The worn edges, the weight of meaning pressed into metal, military, high-ranking. The world shifted on its axis. A man near the back of the crowd froze first. He was older, posture stiff, ball cap pulled low, his eyes locked onto the insignia, and something deep inside him snapped awake. His mouth fell open slightly. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The recognition hit him like a memory he had tried to bury. He straightened without thinking, spine locking into place. Then another veteran noticed. Then another. Recognition rippled outward like electricity running across water. One by one, people reacted without realizing why. Shoulders pulled back, feet aligned, phones lowered as hands suddenly felt inappropriate holding them. Laughter vanished completely. Even breathing seemed too loud. The guards felt it too. Their bodies betrayed them before their minds could argue. One adjusted his stance. Another dropped his smirk, jaw tightening. The confidence they had worn so easily a moment ago cracked, replaced by something closer to respect mixed with fear. The businessman's smile faltered. At first, it twitched, like his face was trying to remember what expression belonged there. Then it disappeared entirely. His eyes narrowed, darting from the insignia to the man's face and back again. "What is that supposed to mean?" he asked, but the words came out weaker than he intended. The black man lifted his head fully now. He wasn't hunched anymore. He wasn't bracing himself against the world. He stood tall, as if gravity itself had adjusted to him. When he spoke again, his voice carried across the plaza, steady and absolute. Not loud, not angry, certain. "Stand down." The command cut clean through the air. The guards obeyed before they even realized they had moved. Hands dropped, feet shifted back. One guard took a step away instinctively, heart racing as he tried to understand why his body had reacted faster than his pride. Training older than ego had answered first. Silence flooded the plaza again, but this time it was different. It wasn't tense. It wasn't mocking. It was reverent. The kind of silence that settles in churches and graveyards, the kind that acknowledges sacrifice without needing words. The black man held the insignia up just long enough for those who knew to know, and those who didn't to feel the weight anyway. Then he lowered it, slipping it back into his jacket with the same calm care he had shown before. "I commanded units larger than this crowd," he said. His voice carried memory now, not bitterness, truth, men and women who followed me into places most people will never see on a map. I watched kids become soldiers. I wrote letters to parents who would never hear their child's voice again. The crowd didn't move. No one interrupted. Even the businessman stood frozen, his wealth suddenly meaningless in the face of a story money could not buy. "I buried friends," the man continued, his eyes scanning the faces around him. "Friends who died protecting people who would never know their names, never know their faces, never know their color. I learned dignity when it cost blood." A sharp inhale rippled through the crowd. Someone near the front wiped their eyes without realizing tears had formed. The veterans stood straighter now, eyes fixed forward, memories pressing heavy against their chests. The businessman took a step back, then another. Color drained from his face as understanding settled in, slow and crushing. This wasn't a poor man looking for attention. This wasn't someone trying to prove himself for scraps of respect. This was a leader, a man who had already proven himself in places where respect meant survival and failure meant death. The businessman swallowed hard. His expensive watch felt tight on his wrist. His tailored suit suddenly felt like a costume. All the words he had prepared, all the confidence he had leaned on, shriveled under the weight of a reality he could no longer control. "I didn't know," he muttered, almost to himself. The black man met his gaze. "You didn't ask." That was all he said. The guards stood awkwardly now, unsure what to do with their hands, their authority stripped bare in front of everyone. One nodded slightly, not as an order received, but as a recognition given. Respect, finally, in its purest form. The crowd had changed. The same people who had laughed now looked down at the ground, ashamed. Others stared at the man with new eyes, replaying every joke, every whisper, every moment of silence they had chosen over decency. The businessman tried to speak again, but nothing came out. His power had lived on assumptions, on believing he could read a man's worth by his jacket, his shoes, his place in the crowd. Those assumptions lay broken at his feet. The black man looked around once more, taking in the plaza, the faces, the quiet. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Victory didn't look like celebration. It looked like truth finally standing upright. "This," he said softly, gesturing around him, "is why respect matters. Not because of titles, not because of money, but because you never know who you're standing in front of." No one laughed. No one argued. The power dynamic had shattered completely, scattered like glass across the stone plaza. What remained was something far heavier and harder to ignore: humanity. And as the man turned slightly, preparing to walk away, the crowd remained frozen, knowing that whatever came next would not erase what had already been revealed. Some lessons arrive gently, others arrive like this, and once learned, they can never be unseen. The businessman swallowed hard, and for the first time since he'd stepped into the plaza that morning, his voice betrayed him. It came out smaller than he expected, thinner, almost unsure. "I didn't know," he said, as if that single sentence might undo everything that had already been said and done. The black man studied him for a brief moment, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with a quiet understanding that felt heavier than either. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. "That's the problem," he replied. Those 3 words landed harder than any insult earlier, because they carried truth without cruelty. They exposed something deeper than ignorance. They exposed a habit, a reflex, a way of moving through the world without ever stopping to question who deserved respect and who didn't. Around them, the plaza began to breathe again. Security shifted uncomfortably. One guard cleared his throat, eyes lowered, suddenly aware of the weight of his uniform. Another stepped forward and spoke quietly, almost ashamed. An apology followed. Not loud, not public, just enough to be heard by the man it was meant for. It wasn't polished, but it was real. The crowd started to break apart, slowly. People turned away, suddenly busy, suddenly late for somewhere else. The same phones that had been raised moments ago disappeared into pockets. No one wanted to be seen watching anymore. No one wanted to be remembered as part of what had just been exposed. No laughter remained, no jokes, no comments whispered behind hands. Just the soft shuffle of feet and the uncomfortable awareness that something important had happened, and most of them had failed it. The businessman stood there, isolated now. His friends had stepped back, pretending to check messages or take calls that didn't exist. The confidence that once wrapped around him like a tailored jacket hung loose and empty. He looked at the black man again, really looked this time, as if trying to see past the worn clothes, past the assumptions he'd clung to so easily. He extended his hand. It wasn't confident, it wasn't commanding. It hovered there, uncertain, fingers stiff, waiting, an offer, an apology, a hope that a gesture could bridge the distance his words had created. The black man glanced at the hand. Then he looked past it, toward the open space of the plaza, toward the people who had already turned away. His expression didn't change. There was no bitterness there, just clarity. "I don't need your apology," he said calmly. "I needed you to think before you laughed." The hand hung in the air for a moment longer. Then it dropped. That was the moment the businessman finally understood what he couldn't buy, couldn't negotiate, couldn't smooth over with charm. Some damage isn't loud. Some lessons don't come with forgiveness wrapped neatly around them. Some moments are meant to be carried, not erased. The black man turned away. As he began to walk, the plaza seemed to move with him. People stepped aside without being asked, not out of fear, out of respect. Conversations died as he passed. Eyes followed him, not with curiosity now, but with reflection. He didn't rush, he didn't linger. Each step was steady, unhurried, grounded. No one spoke. The space parted naturally, like water around something solid and sure. When he reached the edge of the plaza, he paused for just a second. Not to look back, not to wait. Just long enough to take a breath that felt lighter than the ones before it. Then he continued on, disappearing into the flow of the city as if he had always belonged there. Behind him, the plaza felt different, smaller somehow, quieter, as if it had been stripped of something false and left to sit with what remained. Later, people would talk about it. They would tell the story over lunch breaks and dinners. They would say they witnessed something powerful, something rare. They would describe the silence, the insignia, the way the crowd froze. They would say it was inspiring, eye-opening, unforgettable, but only a few would truly understand what it meant, because the moment wasn't about a badge, or a rank, or a command that stopped a crowd in its tracks. It wasn't about proving someone wrong in public or winning an argument with words sharper than laughter. It was about the cost of assumptions. Respect isn't about wealth. Authority isn't about volume, and dignity doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself when tested. The businessman stood alone for a long moment after the man was gone. The plaza resumed its rhythm around him, but something inside him had shifted. He replayed the laughter in his head, his words, the ease with which he had judged a stranger and felt justified doing it. He realized how close he had come to missing the lesson entirely. Some people never get that moment, the moment where the mirror is held up without mercy, where the truth steps forward calmly and refuses to be ignored. He had gotten his. Whether he would carry it forward or set it down the moment it became uncomfortable was a question only time could answer. Because the most dangerous mistake you can make isn't laughing out loud. It isn't being wrong in public. It's assuming you know someone's worth before they remind you who they are. And by the time they do, it's often already too late to take back the silence you chose when respect was required.